Good morning. So a few weeks ago, I was in Liberia, West Africa, and we had flown all night coming back from Liberia, and I had a stopover in Paris because I needed to make my way to London. I had some speaking engagements there. So flew all night, landed at Charles de Gaulle in Paris at 5 a.m., and proceeded to figure out how to navigate the European train system. So I had to take the Eurostar from the airport to the London and the underground, and I'll be honest, I was feeling pretty good about myself. Going through passport control, half the things were in French. There was a little bit of English, but I was making it, okay? I was doing pretty good. And I am maybe one of those annoying people who smile and say hello to literally everybody I see. Like if I'm passing someone in the street, I'll be like, hi, hello. I was in India 2 days ago, just got home. And in India, right, I'm walking down the sidewalks, hello, and they're like, okay. So I was doing that in the train station as I'm making my way through all of these little stops, check the boarding passes, check the passports and all of that. And there, at one point, there was this man behind me. And of course, I turn around and smile and say, good morning. I go to the little cafe and get my cappuccino and my croissant in Paris in preparation to board the train. And I sit down and start to read a book. I have about an hour before the train actually leaves. And over time, there ended up being about 200, 250 people that were congregating, waiting for the Eurostar to go into London. And I happened to see, I looked up at one point from my book, and the man that was behind me in passport was now making his way across the lobby. And he and I made eye contact. And I, of course, smile, and I go back down to my book. A couple minutes later, I look up, and he's kind of over on the other side of the lobby, and he is looking at me again and smiles, and I smile back, and it's at that point that I was like, hey, what's up? And a couple minutes after that, he comes over to me, and I'm sitting there, and now I'm really like, okay, how we doing? Are we looking nice? And he walks over to me, and I'm sitting down, and he does one of these things where he leans in to say something in your ear, right? And so I was like, hey, how's it going? And he leans down, and he's British, and he goes, excuse me, Mom, your shirt is on backwards. I nearly rang my wife to ask if I should tell you or not, but I wanted to come over and tell you. So I said thank you and proceeded to dig a hole and died right there in the middle of the train station. So I tell you that story to say this. Sometimes you just need people to come up to you and tell you your shirt is on backwards and hey, here's a better way, right? So that's what I want to do today. We are going to talk about, I think, the topic that is always on everybody's mind, behaviors. What on earth do we do? Nothing makes me crazier than going to trainings where they tell me they're going to tell me what to do, and then they never actually get beyond the ethereal psychological concepts, and then they thank you for coming. And I'm like, no, what do you want me to do? So that's what we're going to do here today. We're going to break this up into two sections. I am going to hit just a little bit on the brain because, y'all, it's important. We have to understand what is happening biologically, neurologically, biochemically with our kids. If all I ever do is get up here and talk to you about how to troubleshoot behaviors, and we completely ignore what's happening biologically, we are simply not going to make the progress that we need. It is a two-sided coin. We understand the brain and we understand behavior, but they go together. Okay? So that being said, let's talk for a minute how a healthy brain is built. That looks a little bit like this. Baby cries, we meet the need. Baby cries, we meet the need. Baby cries, we meet the need. This repetitive engagement pattern happens hundreds of thousands of times from birth to about age 2, 2.5. Just a natural process. And what that does is it over time builds a brain that just exists here. My world is safe. This world works for me. My needs are met. Well, if we know anything, we know that the kids that we work with, that is not so much their experience. Baby cries, nobody comes. Baby cries, nobody comes. Baby cries, nobody comes. Baby stops crying. Now, why baby stops crying is twofold. The first is rather obvious. Crying is a learned response. Young newborns, young babies, young toddlers learn very, very quickly. I elicit this sound out of my mouth, and it prompts a response from a caregiver. Well, when this interaction pattern doesn't happen, they're going to stop utilizing that as a strategy. But what's a little less known is what's happening biologically and biochemically when baby cries and nobody comes and baby cries and nobody comes. They're flooding with two things. Number one, cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and number two, adrenaline. Now, cortisol and adrenaline are our friends. They help keep us alive, but young fetal, young newborn, young baby brains were never meant to handle that high of levels of cortisol and adrenaline at such a chronic rate. It's actually toxic to a developing brain. Now, we need those, but these babies that are coming to us didn't need all of that. Cortisol and adrenaline serves us well even in our everyday circumstances. Let me give you a couple of examples. If you are out hiking in the woods with your family and you see a bear off in the distance, in that moment, you are going to disconnect from your frontal cortex. This is where all of your executive functioning, strategizing, dialogue, making good decisions all happens here. You're going to disconnect from that, and you're going to flip into your midbrain where your amygdala is housed. That's that fight, flight, freeze we all know about. Without any input from you, when you see that bear, your brain is going to make a decision. Some of your brains will say to fight, to go towards the bear in an effort to survive. I don't understand you people, but go with God. I really hope it goes well. Some of your brains will tell you to flee. That's that flight response. Run away, survive, get away from the bear. You are my people. We could hang out. We could have coffee. Some of your brains will go into freeze mode. We call that clinically tonic immobility. It's just that inability to scream or run or move or do anything. We see a lot of this with sexual assault survivors, that they get frozen and then they are actually bathed in shame afterwards, saying things to themselves. Why didn't I fight back? Why didn't I yell? Why didn't I cry for help? It's because they were frozen. They had no ability to control that. Your brain will do it for you, and you get no input from that. But in that moment, when you flip and flood with that cortisol and adrenaline, that presence of those hormones is going to give you excess strength to fight the bear, if that's what your brain tells you to do. It's going to give you excess speed and endurance to run from the bear, if that's what your brain tells you to do. So it has its place. I know for me this happens quite frequently in the form of driving. So if you've ever been driving down the freeway at 15, 20 miles an hour over the speed limit, which I never do, except I kind of do that, and you see a policeman off in the distance, in that moment, your brain is sensing some financial fear, some punitive fear. In a lot of ways, your brain, when it sees that policeman, is saying, danger, danger, danger. Now note, when you see that policeman, what does your foot automatically do? Comes off the gas and it moves over to the brake, right? And then as you pass him, you're looking in your rearview mirror like, is he pulling out behind me? Is he pulling out? All of this happens so incredibly quickly. In fact, data tells us it takes 2.5 milliseconds. 2.5 milliseconds to go from being engaged in your frontal cortex to flipping into your amygdala, which makes perfect sense. When I see that policeman, I don't immediately go into this calculative move like, okay, what is the posted speed limit? Okay, let me check my current rate of speed. A little fast, let me do some calculations. Okay, let me move my right foot from the gas to the brake. I don't go through this whole sequencing process. It's immediate. I have that response, 2.5 milliseconds. You see the bear? 2.5 milliseconds. You're going to respond. The same is true for our kids, is my point. But when we have kids who chronically have been exposed to those high toxic levels of cortisol and adrenaline, their brains are going to look a little bit like this, right? They may look like this on the outside. Hello. But on the inside, this is how their brains are wired, and this is exactly why you're getting a lot of the behavioral responses that you're getting. They're teed up to try and survive. Essentially, what their brains are doing every day, again, with no input from them consciously, is it's scanning, saying, is this a threat? Is this a threat? Is this a threat? Is this a threat? Over and over and over again. This is what they're ready for. And it's why they have such an exaggerated response in moments of stress. So all of that starts to say then, kind of a Cliff Note version clearly, but it begs the question then, okay, if I've got 2.5 milliseconds to interrupt this process where they flip and flood so easily over the most innocent or innocuous of situations, how on earth do I slow that down? Well, I'm glad you asked. If you are having, let's say, a massive ugly cry, and you're just boo-hooing all over yourself, and he walks up to you and wraps his arms around your neck to give you a big hug, that feels good, right? You get that sensation of, oh. Well, the reason that feels good is because when he is putting that compression on you, he's actually compressing what's called your vagus nerve. It's part of the polyvagal theory. When your vagus nerve is compressed, it's going to lower your heart rate, and it's going to lower your respiratory rate, both of which take a brain that's here and kick it back to here. And y'all, this is the ball game. When we can get their brains to exist in this relaxed state, that's when they can hear you, that's when they can start making better decisions, that's when they can really dialogue with you about what happened. When they're here, they can't hear you. They have disconnected from that area of the brain. So number one, if anything, in practical day-to-day life strategies, I would encourage you with this. Where are they, brain-wise? Where are they? We've got to be able to start to understand it and recognize it, and then we move forward from there. So because you can't walk around all day long, right? Let me compress your vagus nerve, please. You seem a little upside down, right? Like, no, we can't do that. So there's ways that we can use to kind of simulate that, only a tiny fraction of which would fit in my suitcase. So certainly much more could be said about this. But if anything, I would say number one, weighted blanket, weighted blanket, weighted blanket. Y'all, the efficacy rate on these things is phenomenal. What that's doing is it's simulating that compression. What a lot of parents are a little misinformed about, however, is they think that the weighted blanket is only for sleep. Please, 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 let's drag that thing out into your living room, into the playroom, into the car. If, going places is a struggle for them, the more times that we can keep some compression on these bodies, the quicker we're starting to retrain that brain to exist in that relaxed state, and that's what we want. If all we do is put it on while they sleep, that's valuable, but we're only gaining at that point, 7, 8 hours of that compression. We want to try to maximize that as much as we can. I will say this, though, only if your kid likes it, and never, never, never tell them it's because of a specific behavior. Meaning, we never want to say things like, dude, you are seriously a little bit sideways today, go grab your weighted blanket. The minute we correlate any of these interventions that we're about to talk about with a behavior, you have handed them all sorts of power, all sorts of unhealthy power, and that's exactly what we want to avoid. We want to make it just sort of a natural part of their environment, and when they have that feeling of, they're naturally going to want to gravitate to it. So weighted blanket number one, but then of course there's other things that can kind of help simulate that. This, for example, is a compression shirt. They wear this under their school uniform, under their pajamas if they want. In any way, it just sort of gives them that hug underneath their clothes. However, I will say this about compression shirts. They are very polarizing. Your kid will either love it or they cannot rip it off of their body fast enough. There tends to not be a lot of middle ground with these. It is very much child dependent, as is a lot of the stuff that we're about to talk about. What I tell people is this: save your receipts. Try it, right? Give it a roll. If they hate it, send it back. You've lost nothing. But my goodness, if they hit on this and it does help give them that sensation of, man, how much progress are we able to make at that point? For some young elementary school kids who do enjoy that feeling of the weighted blanket and the compression shirt, you can even escalate to something like a weighted vest, or this is actually a compression vest. You don't really get away with this much past the early elementary school age, but man, those younger boys even especially, you could sell this as a superhero vest of some sort, maybe not in purple, or plum apparently is a thing too. I don't know, but compression or weighted vests are key. Also kind of think about how you're setting up their environment. Can you have things like sensory sacks around? This is something they kind of climb into. It's a little bit like a Lycra pillowcase, and they can just hang out and watch cartoons in that thing, and man, that's what we're after. Picture that their brains are kind of free-falling, and spinning all of the time due to that hormone influx and due to that tendency to scan, looking for those threats. When we give them tools like this, probably $20 on Amazon, it really helps to grab hold of that brain, and it sort of inherently communicates, baby, you're safe. Baby, you're okay. But we have to be willing to set our environment up for that. Please don't just kind of take these products and go and make their room like that. I mean, you can, that's great, but if you're going to do that, let's duplicate it to where you're spending most of your time, right? If they're only going into their room to sleep, well, then having all of this in there, you're not really grabbing a lot of the benefit of it. If you've got a preschooler who has a hard time sitting crisscross applesauce at circle time in preschool, let's try things like a weighted stuffed animal, which, was so cool that they're in the bags. This one is also infused with lavender, and you can, in fact, microwave this one as well and make it warm, throw it in the freezer and make it cold, but you put that thing in their little lap, and it gives them something to grab hold of. It gives their brain something to redirect into. So understand kind of that effect of the brain, but moreover, let me kind of illustrate it like this. I want you to understand what that presence of cortisol and adrenaline does over time. Let's say, for example, we have, a 7-year-old boy. And he's sailing right along in life. He's doing well. Life is good. But then, oh, look, some traumatic event has befallen this child. He is now homeless and lives in the car with mom. He has now been institutionalized. He's now been put in foster care. In some manner, there's been a sexual abuse incident. There's been a physical abuse incident. In some manner, a traumatic event has befallen this child. By virtue of that, he's going to go down into the pit, so to speak. Well, because of the way the Lord designed us and our innate ability and push to keep seeking Him and surviving, he is going to pop out of that on his own. But the problem is, this is now his new baseline level of functioning. And because we know what we know about the kids that we work with, this is almost never an isolated event. So, oh look, there's been another sexual abuse incident. Again, he's going to go down into the pit, and again, he's going to pop out of it, but now this is his new baseline level of functioning, and so on and so forth. This is the trajectory of a child with unmitigated trauma. It's negative trending. This is also why we know what we know about rates of incarceration, homelessness, teen pregnancy, addiction. In every way, those outcomes moving forward in the lifespan are directly oftentimes correlated to these events in early childhood. But, if I may point out, guys, what we tend to do as parents is we treat this 7-year-old boy the same as his same age peers. And that is incredibly unfair. Be 7. Act 7. Get up off the floor and sit up. You are 7. Well, guys, how can he? Every single one of these events has impacted this child psychologically, physically, emotionally, academically. In every way, he is now operating at a deficit. So instead of a 7-year-old, you've now got a child who more behaves like he's 3 or 4. You know what we're going to do about that? We're going to treat him like he's 3 or 4. And I don't mean in a demeaning way. I mean in a way of which we are going to have the expectations placed on him that more mirror his developmental age. We're going to understand, because of everything that happened with the brain and everything we understand now, we're going to expect him to be 3 or 4. So let's surround him and meet him there where he is. Because here's the interesting thing that happens. If we take that boy, and just because I ran out of room, I'm going to bring him over here. Let's say now he's come into care. Now he's been adopted. In some way, this child has now 3 critical changes that have occurred in his life. Number 1, he has consistent access to food, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Number 2, he has an attached or in the process of an attached relationship with at least one primary caregiver. And number 3, he is no longer subject to daily abuse engagements. Just by virtue of having those 3 needs met, what we're going to see is his baseline level of functioning start to rise. But remember, all of this had an effect. So he was standing in the 4th grade lunch line, and some boy very innocently bumped into him. He flipped, he flooded, he turned around and just wails on this kid. He had a little moment, Catch this, handled appropriately. Handled in this therapeutic approach that we're going to talk about actually works as a launch pad to increase his baseline level of functioning. He walked in the door. You asked him very nicely to please go pick up his room before you were going to go to the park. He went to his room, slammed the door off the hinge, and put his fist through your sheetrock. He had a little moment. Handled appropriately will act as a launch pad to increase his baseline level. What I'm saying is this: the healing comes from the moments where they screw it up. Guys, this is what we've got to grab onto. Our expectation cannot simply be, welcome to our home. We have 3 PlayStations and food for days, and no one's going to lay a hand on you. This is now our expectation of your behavior. And we don't say that. We may not even really realize that we're thinking that. But if we're really honest with ourselves, this is exactly the standard that we tend to put on them. Instead, I would say, let's be ready for this. Let's understand what to do when, because it's these moments that act as the genesis towards healing. And that's because when you respond in a different way than anybody has ever responded to them before, it makes their brain go, wait a minute, I just slammed the door and nobody came in and beat me. Wait a minute, I just cussed you out and nobody took my food away. It's that little moment to get the brain to say, hang on, something's different. That's how we start to engage new behavioral engagement patterns. Guys, this is it. It's these moments. But we've got to be ready for that and equipped for that. And that's the goal. That's what we're after. We're pointing them to Christ, and we are understanding how God comes at us. Grace, 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 right? Just as we've heard today. And that's simply what we've got to get behind, because our kids look like this on the outside. But what we've got to understand is little by little, in addition to their biological experiences, is their experiential experiences. That was very good words there. That was not good. I'll redo that. But it's things like, they had, for example, a disrupted bond or attachment to their birth mother. They got changed into a different foster home that they loved and had relationships there. Their favorite nanny in the orphanage, right, got fired, so she no longer works there. They now had to move to a different school for the 3rd time this year. Over and over and over again, what we're doing to these kids is this. And this is what they're looking like on the inside. They may look like this on the outside, except with the head. I didn't really mean to cut off his head. The heads are probably still attached, but this is effectively what they look like on the outside, but this is what we're dealing with on the inside. So we have to be able to come at them with that response. And guys, I get it. I love obedience. As Johnston said, I run a house with 7 boys. It's high structure for sure. I think if it wasn't, I would be living in a frat house of some sort. So it's definitely high structure, but it's also high nurture. And that's another thing that I would kind of encourage you to talk to your spouse about or do some kind of interpersonal reflection. What does my home look like? They need high structure. Expectation is everything to children from trauma. Their whole history has said to them, am I going to get home from school today? And is there going to be food? Unknown. Am I going to get home and is mom going to be high today? Nobody knows. Am I going to get home and we're still going to be living in that home, or are we back in the car again? Guess I'll find out when I get there. The lack of stability and security and safety and expectation of what's coming next has likely never been part of their history. So one of the things we really need is high structure. But if your house runs high structure and low nurture, you're going to get a lot of that rebellion building in their belly. Conversely, if your house is high nurture, baby, I love you. Sure, yes, no problem. Anything you want. And low structure, going to have a whole other kind of issue on your hand, right? What we want is to kind of craft and create that balance, high structure, high nurture. And that's because of this. I love first-time obedience. I love it. Yes, ma'am, and obey works very, very well for me. But for the purposes of this illustration, let's say, for example, that first-time obedience is like the roof of a house. I also really like the roof in my house. Keeps me dry, keeps me safe, keep me warm. But if you want to build a house, first thing you do is not go put a roof on. If you want to build a house, the first thing you do is pick a plot of land and pour a foundation, and then through day-to-day loving, leading, teaching, discipling, connecting with your child, you begin to get the components of a house. That day-to-day engagement is how you get the walls, it's how you get the window, it's how you put the door, and then you got to shiplap it, because that's what Joanna Gaines would do. Right? And then you can put the roof on. Essentially what I'm saying is this. The relationship compels the obedience. But so often, what we are tempted to do is require obedience in the absence of any relationship. And that will never, never work. What does Christ first do with us when he grabs hold of our life? He enters into a relationship with us and us with him. There's synchrony there. There's reciprocity of emotion there. We are in relationship together. I am obedient to what the parameters that God puts on my life and to the call of my life because I am in such deep, intimate, authentic relationship with the Lord that I happily obey him. He does not come at us like this. You will obey me and then I will enter into relationship with you. This whole concept of therapeutic parenting can sometimes come off as spoiling the child or, usurping your biblical parental authority, and it's not that. Does it remind you of anything? While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Not once we got it together and stopped sinning, Christ died for us. This is the model. This is what he does for us, and this is exactly why we can then turn around and have that same pursuit of grace and connection towards these kids. So understanding a little bit kind of biologically and biochemically and understanding a little bit about understanding their history and what that does, let's talk about some of these very common trauma behaviors a little bit. So let's do lying. Anybody got a kid that lies every time they open their mouth? Yeah. Okay. All right, I have a very complex, fancy, deep, clinical answer for you. So you might want to get out your pen. Are you ready? Stop asking questions. And good night, thank you for coming. Stop asking questions. If you've got a kid with a proclivity towards lying, stop phrasing things in the form of a question. Let me illustrate it like this. Kid walks in the door, drops their backpack in your living room floor, and you can see that worksheet sticking out of the top of that backpack, and it is completely undone. Moreover, you've gone on your little parent portal that day, and you know they have homework. Yet, kid walks in the door, what is the first thing you say to them? Do you have homework? Did you do your homework? Oh, yeah. I did my homework. Huh, really? You did your homework? Yeah, it's done. Okay. So you're telling me if I walk over right now to your backpack and take out that worksheet, it's going to be done? Oh, yeah, you don't need to check. I had some extra time at lunch today. I got it done. Okay, game on. Liar. Go to your room. You've now lost your PlayStation. Now you're not getting dessert. Now you're not going on the family bike ride. You screwed it up again. I asked you a direct question. You sat there and lied to my face. Is this not what we do? If I may, respectfully, I just set that kid up to fail. I know this is a weakness for him. I know he struggles with lying, but look what I did. I just asked him 3, 4 successive questions. Did you do your homework? Really? Did you do it? Are you sure you did it? Y'all, they will sooner die than admit the truth to you. Think about how much vulnerability and humility it takes for us to admit when we make a mistake, right? You screw up something at work, is your first instinct, I'm ashamed to say, not to be like, how can I either A, cover this up or fix it really, really quick before anybody finds out, right? Nobody tell Herbie I said that, okay? It's not being videotaped, I don't think, so I feel somewhat safe in this room. Think about how difficult it is for us to come to our boss, for example, and be like, dude, I'm so sorry. Like, I messed this up. I don't know if you call your boss dude or not. I try not to, but that takes an immense amount within us. These kids are so far gone, right? Academically, psychologically, I mean, not beyond the reach of the Lord and not beyond redemption, certainly, but functionally, oftentimes, are so far gone. Yet we are having the expectation that they will come to us, look us dead in the eye, and say, yes, sir, I apologize. I just lied to you right then. My bad. Can we restart? And I would like to give you a better answer. Like, this is not what happens. We yell, they yell back at us, everybody's mad now, and nobody's getting the homework done. Instead, let me offer you this. Stop asking questions. So instead of, did you do your homework, I'm instead going to say something like, hey, sweet boy, hop up here. Let's have a snack together and go over your homework. Man, you've been doing so good lately. I'm so proud of you. High five. Now, that took me like all of, 4 seconds to say, but let me break down for you real quick what I just did. Number one, listen to my tone. Hey, sweet boy, your nonverbal communication speaks much louder than any of your words. Listen to my tone, hear my body language, right? I'm relaxed. Hey, sweet boy. Not, hey, boy, right? Very big difference. That's immediately going to fire that brain up. Hey, sweet boy, hop up here. Let's have a snack. That's point number two. Anytime there is about to be even a chance of some nonsense occurring or it's a touchy issue with your kid, offer food. Do it over food. If anybody wants to hang out with me, offer me food, right? It's very common knowledge that food raises blood sugar levels, but what's a little bit less known is that food actually also decreases cortisol levels. So in the midst of maybe a frustrating moment, by introducing the presence of food, you're putting your child biochemically in better balance to maybe have a better response to you. It's that very idea of breaking bread together and fellowshipping over a meal together. Offer food. Hey, sweet boy, hop up here. Let's have a snack and go over your homework together. That's point three. I am offering a moment of connection with him. I'm not saying go to your room and get your homework done and don't come out until it's done. I'm saying, hey, sweet boy, let's go over it together. And then fourthly, I am finding something to affirm him with. Man, you've been doing so good lately. I'm so proud of you. Y'all, I don't care if he has straight D's. I'm going to find something. He has value. He has worth. Let's find something positive that we can say. And then lastly, note that that's a statement. It's not a question. Hey, sweet boy, hop up here. Let's have a snack and go over your homework together. Man, you've been doing so good lately. Period. Not question mark. Now, in that circumstance, he is going to have to say something like, oh, well, I'm almost done. I just need a few more minutes. Well, I know that's a lie because he hasn't even started yet, but that's not the hill I'm dying on. I'm going to hop right over that and say something like, dude, no problem. How about 20 minutes? You and I'll sit together. High five. In that scenario, are we not so much more likely to, number one, get the homework done, but number two, for everybody not to just be mad afterwards, right? Keep your eye on the need at hand. In this scenario, my need is that this homework needs to be done. Phrase it in the form of a statement. So anytime you need something with your kid who struggles with lying, stop asking questions. So let's move from that for a minute to, let's say hoarding. Certainly kids can be prone to hoard other things besides food, but food hoarding is prolific across the space of child welfare with so many of our kids. Whether or not you have a child whose file indicates that they had a lack of early access to food or not, I would encourage everyone in this room to stop on your way home and implement what's called a yes basket. Who's familiar with a yes basket? Nice. Look at y'all all TBRI trauma informed. For those of you that aren't too familiar, a yes basket looks like this. It is a basket, a bucket, a container, doesn't matter what it is, but it is filled with all healthy food. This is things like bananas, apples, grapes, trail mix, dried almonds, small water bottles. I don't care what it is, but it is all healthy food. And it's going to sit on your dining room table, on your breakfast bar area, somewhere in your home that is very easily seen by your child. What you can't have, hear me on this, please. You cannot have a yes drawer. You cannot have a yes pantry shelf it has to be visible to your child because, again, let's think back to what we just said. Unconsciously throughout the day, their brains are scanning, right? And part of that, is this a threat? Is this a threat? Is also saying to them unconsciously, remember when you're hungry, remember when you're hungry, remember when you're hungry. None of them explicitly remember, meaning have concrete memory of. None of them explicitly remember being 6 months old and laid on the bed for hours at a time and no one coming to feed them. But hear me when I say they implicitly remember. The body remembers. And that implicit memory of a lack of early access to food drives so much of the negative behavior fallout that you're seeing in your home. So although you're not correlating the lack of access to food to the behavior that you're seeing now, stealing, cheating, lying, running away, trust me when I say, almost always, there is in fact a direct connection. So by being proactive and implementing things like the yes basket, you are right off the bat, number one, biochemically putting them in balance, but number two, subverting a lot of that scan. Because when it says, remember when you're hungry, remember when you're hungry, and it sees this, it goes, oh, okay, wait, I'm okay. I was working with a family, this has been probably over a year or so ago now, and they had a 9-year-old daughter who was adopted out of foster care when she was 3, and for 6 years they had been experiencing some of the worst hoarding behavior that clinically I had ever seen before. This little girl was doing things like taking half-eaten food or intact food or wrappers of food and wrapping it in her underwear and then putting it like in the lining of her mattress. It was in the pockets in her clothes, in her dresser, in her closet. It was in her shoes, everywhere that you can imagine. For 6 years, this family had been dealing with this issue. So they meet with me, and I lay out this whole concept of the yes basket, and we were sitting sort of in this kind of a conference room or a meeting room, and there was a big table between us, and the dad was a big southern dude. And he looks at me, and I've explained it, and he leans forward, doesn't say anything, and he smacks his hand on the table, and he looks at me and says, "She will eat it all the first day." And I, in an effort both for self-preservation and to be a little funny, leaned forward and smacked my hand on the table, and I said, "She will eat it all the first day. And she may eat it all the second day, and the third day, and the fourth day, but I promise you, you do this right, meaning number one, it's always a yes, and number two, it never goes empty, and you will see this behavior start to dissipate." Sure enough, went back. It was almost a month later, just kind of for a follow-up, and again, I'm good about preserving my physical life. I peeked my head around the corner, and I was like, "Hey, didn't get any angry emails from you," and he kind of threw his head back and laughed and said, "Would you believe we've seen nothing since day 6? No other trauma behavior works like this does. This is the only one that can be like a switch in their brain. The rest of them take an extraordinarily long time and long suffering and patience. Access to food is not that. Food is primal. Food is foundational. We are born and the first thing we do is eat. Food should never, never, never be used as a punishment. We can't ever take away food, even if it's dessert. There are innumerable other ways to try and get their attention, but please, please, let us not leverage the use or the taking away of food. I will say that this is where the late Dr. Purvis and I differ ever so slightly on our approach to the yes baskets. My 2 cents is that from day one, it's always a yes and they never have to ask. She says from day one, it's always a yes, but they just have to ask you first. I get there after a little bit, but in the beginning, they don't trust you enough that you're going to say yes. What part of their history or experience has ever said to them, if I ask an adult for something, they're going to meet my need? It's totally foreign to them. So in the beginning, when that child enters your home, you're kind of going to give them a tour and be like, "Dude, here's your bedroom, here's the bathroom, like here's all your shower stuff, and hey man, you see that basket over there on the table? Dude, that's all you. Anytime you're hungry, as much as you want, as often as you want, it's just always a yes, you never even have to ask. And hey, guess what? This is where you're going to want to throw things at me. We got a smaller version of that in your bedroom. So you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and you're hungry, man, you just go for it. As much as you want, as often as you want." Understand that healing, number one, is not linear, that you're going to see great divides and chasms and progress through that. In fact, I just like to draw things today. I don't know, I think it's the jet lag. Like, let me just draw instead of speaking. It sounds fun. Healing, not linear. It's going to look like this. But more detailed, let me illustrate it to you like this. When you first get these kids into your home, behavior might look like this. And then you might have half a day, maybe, before it goes like this again, right? And then, oh, look, you might have 3/4 of a day before nonsense ensues. What you want to do is think about, are you seeing these intervals lengthen in between the nonsense? Because that is an indicator of healing. When I hear parents, and guys, I get it, like been there, so brokenhearted and so discouraged. I have 3 minutes? Nuh-uh. We just started. That's so sad. That's so sad. Okay. What I would encourage you to do is look at the linear. No. We want to be able to see these longer, right? So as you reflect back, understand you have come very, very far. That is so, so sad. It's okay. We're going to recover. Let me say this, because I have so much more to say. Biggest resource, if you want to understand more about how this therapeutic parenting business works, the A to Z of Therapeutic Parenting by Sarah Naish, hands down, my top recommendation. I keep telling her she should give me a little kickback for this book. It hadn't happened yet. But it could be because I almost killed her. Fun, true story. She was in America. She's from England. And she travels with another lady named Sarah. And it was my 40th birthday a few years ago, and kind of live out on a lake. And I was like, man, it's their last day in America. I'll take them out on the boat. Like little sunset, and made a cheese platter. I was like, that'll be great. So sure enough, we launch out onto the boat, and as we're coming back, it had gotten dark, the sun had set, and I said, Sarah, can you do me a favor as we approach the dock? Can you just hop off and grab the rope to tie it off? And she was like, Spitzbot, jolly-o. I shouldn't really say that, but that's how she sounds to me in her accent. And so what she failed to communicate to me that moment was that she'd never done that before. And so she went to hop from the boat onto the dock, but managed to only get one leg on the dock. And as the boat started to drift away, she ended up in a full split. And about 2 seconds later, plunged into the completely black, pitch black water. I could see nothing. I reflexively, talk about a brain response, leap out of the boat onto the dock, and I'm standing there looking at the water. I have no idea if this woman can swim. I'm thinking, I've just drowned the Brit. Do I call the State Department? I don't really know what to do with this. Anyway, she lived, but then she proceeded to give me my own autographed copy of the book. To Sonia, my lovely new friend, I will never forget the day you nearly drowned me and deprived all of my fans of my future wisdom. Thank you for your lovely brilliantness, idiot, Sarah Naish. But anyway, great book. This, you guys, I hate just saying to parents who are struggling and who are in the pit, in all seriousness, please go read a book. This will solve it. This is not that. This actually reads like a dictionary. So meaning, like, name a behavior. Stealing. You would just go to S for stealing. And it will tell you why it happens, strategies to use during the event itself, and strategies to use after to help prevent it from happening again. I mean, cruelty to animals, immaturity, hypervigilance, running away, lying, defiance, cruelty to animals, did I say that already? Hygiene, all of that, it's in here, but it's like 3 paragraphs to really help get you on this track of how to parent therapeutically. And then the last thing I'll say and recommend is this. This is a book called The King's Knight by Matthew Blythe. It is a fiction book, but your child, if you have a kid past the age of about 10, 11 in your home, some of the best $12 you will spend. Use this to read aloud during dinner time. Use this for family devotion time. It is an allegory of the word. I know this might be a little heretical, but I think it's in the vein of kind of C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia. I think it's better. It is The King's Knight. Matthew Blythe, B-L-Y-T-H-E. Your kid, this is about a young man named Jonathan who is ransomed from a very dark, awful, dirty prison, and it's essentially ransomed by the Lord's army, and he is knighted as Knight Jonathan. Well, the battle ensues, right, and they kind of go through this whole process, but it ends up in the end, Jonathan ends up dying, and he enters into the gates of heaven. And I just kind of want to end on this encouragement for you. More than your children will see themselves in this story, which they will, You're going to see yourself in this story. Listen to this. So they're walking through the gates of heaven, and Jonathan is noticing along the walls of this very long corridor, there's all these bright, shiny shields and helmets, all of which are unmarked, unblemished. They're in perfect, shiny condition. And he's walking down this hallway, and he's thinking, my armor, which he's carrying, is dirty and dented and pitted and bruised, and it is not worthy of being hung in these halls with these bright, shiny shields from everybody else that's already here. So listen to this. Finally, the guide spoke. There is good reason you are not permitted to store your arms among these pieces, Sir Jonathan, the king's knight. The guide paused and studied him while stroking his long gray beard before asking him with a gruff voice, do you know why? After a slight hesitation, the knight responded, I believe it is because mine are soiled and scarred. Perhaps they are not worthy. My weapons looked like this a long time ago when I was young and had just met the king, but now, Jonathan's voice trailed into silence as he inspected his dirty uniform. The guide was quiet for a few moments before saying, well, Sir Jonathan, what happened to them? Hear this. He offered me a place to serve him. He is the king, so I followed. The battles were tough and the mountains and valleys treacherous and full of enemies. These paths provided me with no lack of ambushes and attacks, some of which I foolishly walked into without thinking. He gave me quests to complete and beloved charges to take care of through these battles and to escort to safety. Sometimes I fell into trouble from the enemy or myself, and the armor was all that kept me from disaster. I was designated an ambassador as well as a knight, and it seemed as if I was always fighting. My armor and weapons are damaged and worn because of my work, sir, the knight defended pleadingly. The guide did not respond, and the hall was quiet, and the knight sighed, I am worn. As a result of all of this, I am very worn. My armor has faded, my weapons are dented, pitted, and scarred. My apologies for making excuses, but dressed like this, I am not ready to see the king. I am quite underdressed. The guide shook his head and slowly smiled. It is always the same with knights of your order. Sir Jonathan looked up. Order? What order, sir? What do you mean? Hear this. It would not disgrace this hall to lay your armor here. It would be a disgrace to you and to the king. You are one of the overcomers. You cannot lay your armor here, for it would be a shame, but not for what you are thinking. It would be a shame for you. You were given quests and battles and challenges and trials, and though not perfect, you chose to fight for and serve your king. When you were called, you answered. Your armor is dented and bruised and scarred, but from the king's business. It is the weaponry of an overcomer, the dress of a friend of the king, not one to be ashamed of before the king. The armor and weapons of these halls are not meant to be trophies. They are not on display as a glory, but as a reminder of a wasted life. Though called to battle, the knights who owned this armor refused to go, or they ran when the horrors of battle appeared. Some decided the life of ease outside these walls was more important than the command of the king from within these walls. It is a hall of missed opportunity and of squandered life. It is the king who forged all of these weapons and armor, and they could withstand any assault. It is the king who called their owners to battle and provided the strength and the means to overcome. All they had to do was trust the king and follow him into battle as you did. But they did not. They did not answer their call fully. They did not overcome. But you, slight as you are, you were different. Though afraid, you trusted him. Though weary, you followed. You made mistakes, but you followed your king. You are to be taken through that door to see your beloved captain, and by order of the king himself, you are to store your armor in his hall. Though all in this city are citizens and beloved of the king, this door into the king's presence is a special entrance and not for all. It is only for those who are of the order to which you belong, that of an overcomer. Every citizen was called to take up his or her armor and follow the king. All were given armor and weapons equal to any quest or battle with the king as their guide. Some chose not to engage the enemy, and for many reasons, none of which matter now, those whose armor you saw in the great halls failed to answer the king's call to follow him completely. And in doing so, they failed to secure an invitation through that door. Their armor and weapons serve as a warning. Be encouraged. You are doing the work of Christ Jesus. You are entering into the most broken and powerful and intimate spaces of these children, and never, never, even through our mistakes and the times that we get it wrong, don't discount the impact that you're having. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Sonia, very much. Incredible words.